When you first learned the trigonometric ratios, you learned the acronym SO, CA, TOA. SO, CA, TOA will help you remember those trig ratios. SO stands for sine, opposite, hypotenuse. CA stands for cosine, adjacent, hypotenuse. And TOA stands for tangent, opposite, adjacent. So the trig ratios are sine of an angle equals the opposite side over the hypotenuse. Cosine of an angle equals the adjacent side over the hypotenuse. And the tangent of an angle equals the opposite side over the adjacent side. We use trig ratios when we have a right triangle and we know an angle of that right triangle, and that angle is not 30, 60, 90 or 45, 45, 90. So we can't use the special right triangle rules. So in this triangle we have a 35-degree angle. I'm going to first label my hypotenuse. Then using this 35-degree angle, I'm going to label the opposite side and the adjacent side. And in this problem, 8 is the adjacent side. So I'm going to look back at my trig ratios and identify the trig ratios that use the adjacent side. I know the adjacent side, so I want to pick cosine and tangent, because both of those ratios involve the adjacent side. So I'm going to start with cosine. Cosine of my angle, in this case 35 degrees, equals the adjacent side, 8, over the hypotenuse, y. At this point, I need to solve for y. To solve for y, my right side of the equal sign is a ratio, so I'm going to turn the left side into a ratio. Now I have a proportion, and to solve that proportion, I'm going to cross multiply. So I'm going to drop the equal sign straight down, and on the left side I'm going to have y times cosine of 35 degrees, and on the right side I'm going to have 1 times 8. Now I need to keep solving for y. I have y times the cosine of 35 degrees, so I'm going to divide by the cosine of 35 degrees. The cosine of 35 degrees is going to cancel with the cosine of 35 degrees, so I'm left with y equals 8 divided by the cosine of 35 degrees. Now whenever I use trig ratios, I'm never going to get an exact answer. So I'm going to use my calculator to approximate my answer. 8 divided by the cosine of 35 degrees. Now before I do this problem, I want to make sure that my mode is in degrees and not radians. So 8 divided by the cosine of 35 degrees is 9 point, I'm going to round to 1 decimal place, 9.8. I'm going to use the other trig ratio involving the adjacent, and that's tangent. So tangent of my angle, 35 degrees, equals the opposite side, x, over the adjacent side, 8. At this point, I have a ratio equal to, I'm going to turn this into a ratio. So now I have a proportion, and to solve this proportion, I'm going to cross multiply. Drop down my equal sign, and I'm going to have 8 times the tangent of 35 degrees equals x. Well, I need to solve for x. And if I look, x is already by itself. So x equals 8 times the tangent of 35 degrees. And I can use my calculator to approximate that answer. About 5.6. Let's try another example. Here's the angle that I know, 28 degrees. Across from the right angle is my hypotenuse. Across from the angle that I'm going to use is the opposite side. And the side next to the angle I know is the adjacent side. In this problem, I know the hypotenuse. The hypotenuse is 17. So I need to look at my trig ratios and use the trig ratios that involve hypotenuse. In this case, sine and cosine. I'm going to start with sine. Sine of my angle, 28 degrees, equals the opposite side, y, over the hypotenuse. Solve for y. Cross multiply. I'm going to have 17 times the sine of 28 degrees equals y. So y equals 17 times the sine of 28 degrees, which is approximately 7 point, if I round to 1 decimal place, that gets rounded to 10, so it actually rounds to 8.0. Now to solve for x, I need to go to the other trig ratio that involves the hypotenuse, the cosine. So the cosine of 28 equals the adjacent side over the hypotenuse. Turn this into a fraction and cross multiply. So I have 17 times the cosine of 28 degrees equals x. So x is going to equal 17 times the cosine of 28 degrees. Use my calculator to approximate. I get approximately 15.